Welcome, fellow thrill-seekers, to a world of shivers and chills. As rain dances and thunder whispers, join us for a spine-tingling journey. Grab your blankets, dim the lights, and let the soothing storm set the stage for a sleep like no other. Get ready to be scared, to sleep. The Redwood Cabin. I used to live in Japan, but recently moved to a town somewhere in America. In our town, there was a story going around that a cult had a cabin somewhere in the woods near our town and that they were doing incantations, summoning spirits and specters, the usual paranormal stuff. My friend Jack, whom I had met when I first came to the town, and I didn't really believe in the paranormal. So, whenever we had the opportunity, we would camp near the section where the cabin was rumored to be and search around for it. It didn't take long since on our 5th try we found it. The cabin was completely hideous. It was infested with cockroaches, spiders, and even some centipedes. The left side of the cabin was slightly decayed. The right side had a bit of a termite problem. At first, it looked like any old rundown cabin. Then we took a second, much closer look. That was when a horrid stench hit us. It was horrible. I gagged and almost vomited. Even though I was busy dealing with the stench, Jack was able to get a look at the walls. They were covered with signs, upside-down crosses, blood-red eyes, and the most frightening part, bodies of people, completely stripped of their clothing and nailed to the wall of the cabin. I thought of calling the police or running. Jack, however horrified he was, insisted on going into the cabin. "I'm not believing this. It's probably just some really good deco," he said. As reluctant as I was, I pushed onward, Jack leading with his flashlight. We opened the door slowly. That was when I couldn't take it anymore. I vomited onto the grass just to the left of the cabin. The reason I vomited was even worse than the stench outside. Just inside the front door was a dead dog. It had been butchered and left to rot. Worse, it was a local dog that had gone missing just 2 days before we found the cabin. Jack gently pushed the dog to the side so he could get inside. He waited a bit for me, and we kept going. Inside was like the exterior, with the exception of blood-red runes replacing the bodies. We came into the main living room of the cabin. It had a big ritual circle. The walls were different too, now sporting words such as devil, the beast, our master, the end, and much more terrifying words. Such as the runes in the eyes, it was blood-red, except this time it seemed like this was real blood. That was when I figured out that the other drawings were simply dried, and it didn't look as clear as these. The more I figured out, the worse I felt. If the others were dried, wouldn't that mean these were just made? That was when I had it. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned to the cabin door, and what I saw I can never unsee. A tall, slender figure covered in intestines, blood, organs, and everything gross and putrid. It was blocking the cabin door. That was when I screamed as loud as I could. I turned back to look at Jack. Though he still looked like Jack, the man I looked at was carrying a knife. He had a grin on his face, widening by the seconds. I backed away from him, but he grabbed my arm and dragged me closer. I struggled, trying to get away, but his grip was locked firmly. I watched in horror as the knife was raised. That was when I made a last-ditch effort. I kicked him in the forbidden zone, which worked, and I ran toward the direction of the door. That was when I bumped into the slender figure again. Now I could make out its face. What I saw was not human. It looked like the face of something out of the deep depths of hell itself. I shambled back a bit, then remembering Jack was there, I moved to the right. I found a window, the only window in the entire cabin. I tried to open it, but it simply didn't budge. I turned back in shock as I realized that this was how it was going to end. I was going to be murdered in some satanic cabin by my friend. I crouched down, now in tears, and closed my eyes. I waited for the knife to end it all. I waited, but eventually nothing happened, so I slowly opened my eyes and saw that it was daytime. Jack, or possessed Jack, had collapsed on the floor, still clenching the knife. The slender figure was gone. I tried the window again, and now that it was daytime, I saw that it was locked. I unlocked it and opened it up. How silly, I thought, that I didn't check for the locks. I made a mental note to always do that and then proceeded to exit via the window, carrying Jack through it first. I ran to our campsite, put Jack in his tent, and went into mine. I recapped what happened and then put this in my diary. Though this wasn't the nearest near-death experience I have ever had, it was definitely the most extreme and grotesque. I waited for Jack to wake up and then headed back to town with him. I never told anyone what had happened and definitely didn't tell Jack, who is now my best friend of all time, that he almost killed me. A cough saved my life. Okay, my name is Jason. This is what happened when I was about 16 years old. I'm 27 now, and what happened that day would change everything. I live in West Virginia where there are mountains all around, so I grew up in the woods, hunting, camping, riding ATVs. So, one day, me and two of my friends, Brian and Jesse, went out on our ATVs to find a place to camp that weekend. This was Thursday, and we wanted to find a place to camp on Saturday. We went pretty far into the woods to try and find the best spot we could because we were bringing our girlfriends camping with us. So, we got probably 5 or 6 miles back in the woods and found this little lake, and we all knew we found it. So, we got off and checked everything out to make sure it wasn't private property or anything, but there were no signs and no house around for miles. "This is it," Jesse said, and we all agreed. It was perfect. So, we all got back on our four-wheelers and headed back, knowing that Saturday was going to be a night to remember. But what we didn't know was it would be the worst night of our lives. So, we got back the next day. We got all our gear loaded up, fishing poles, tents, sleeping bags. We made sure we had everything we needed to make it a fun night, including 3 bottles of Mad Dog and a 30-pack of Bud Light in the cooler. We were ready. We all met up at about 11 o'clock Saturday morning and headed out to our perfect camping spot. When we got there, it was great. We put the tents up, got firewood, set everything up. The girls loved it too, except Brian's girlfriend, we'll call her Kat. She said she felt uneasy, but we just figured it was because she had never been camping before. So we started fishing, swimming, and drinking, just doing everything teenagers do. But Kat just kept looking around and wouldn't join us at all, just sitting by the lake. Finally, it started to get dark, so we started a fire and made some hot dogs. We just sat around it, talking, telling stories, everything you do when you camp. It was about 11:30 when Jesse's girl, Sam, said she was going to go pee, and Kat went with her. They were gone maybe 4 minutes when they came running back, saying Kat saw something behind a tree watching them. I grabbed my 9mm Smith that I brought, and Jesse and I went to check it out. We didn't find anything, so we thought the scary campfire stories just freaked them out. We got back and told them we didn't find anything, but Kat said she knows what she saw and wants to leave. We got her to chill out, and me having a gun kind of put her mind at ease. After about 30 to 45 minutes, we were all ready to lay down and spend alone time with our significant others, and no one was even thinking about what Kat saw anymore. I wish we would have left, because about an hour goes by. My girl, Lindsay, is asleep, but I'm just lying there, listening to the sounds of the woods when I start to hear footsteps. At first, I think it's one of the others, but then I could tell whoever was walking was trying to do it quietly. The footsteps stop at my tent door. I start to freak inside but don't make a sound. They stand there for at least 3 minutes. Then I see the zipper start to slowly unzip. I start to grab my gun when I realize I left it in my bag by the campfire. So stupid, I'm thinking. So, the zipper moves about 6 inches slowly when Lindsay coughs, and it stops. She's still asleep and doesn't know someone or something is trying to sneak into our tent. I hear nothing for about 5 minutes, then footsteps again, but sneaking away from my tent. I can't move, I'm terrified. All I can do is stay quiet and hope it doesn't come back. 30 minutes pass, and all of a sudden, the craziest evil-sounding scream I've ever heard comes from the next tent over, Brian and Kat's. They start screaming, and oh please, and oh. I jump up, running out of the tent, and Lindsay is awake now. I run right to my bag for my gun. Lindsay is right beside me, terrified, not knowing what's going on. I grab it out and look at their tent, and what I see still haunts my dreams to this day. This pale, white, long arms with long claws at the end of its fingers. It's like a humanoid type thing, just taking chunks out of Brian and biting him. I fire, it looks up, and its yellow eyes look into my soul. I'm shaking as it starts galloping toward us, Lindsay screaming. I fire again. It takes off into the woods, screaming that god-awful scream. We run up to their tent, and Jesse and Sam have seen it all happening too, so we run to Brian and Kat. But it's too late. They were both torn up. You couldn't even tell who was who. The girls were crying, Jesse puked, and I felt like I was in a nightmare. I had tunnel vision. I was scanning the woods, hoping whatever that was didn't come back. Jesse and the girls were all huddled up to me as we made our way to the ATVs. I was looking in the woods the whole time with the gun pointed towards the way that thing ran off. We get to the ATVs, and I realize the keys are in the tent, in my pants pocket. I'm in my boxers. About that time, we hear that thing scream again. I tell them to wait there. I got to go back and get the keys. I didn't have a choice, as much as I didn't want to go back. I run as fast as I can to the tent, grab the keys, and turn to run back. There it comes, out of the woods, running right at me. I raise the gun and start firing. I hit it because it yelped and screamed and turned and ran back into the woods again. I run back to the ATVs, and we ride out of there so fast, I'm surprised we didn't wreck and kill ourselves. We went right to the cops and told them everything that happened. They went up to where we were, came back after what seemed like forever, and took us back there with them. By this time, it was light out. We get back there, and everything was destroyed. The tents were ripped up, stuff was thrown everywhere. They take me up to Brian's tent, and there's blood everywhere but no bodies. The cop says, "Where are they?" I said, "I don't know. They were here when we left. That thing must have taken them." Then they start saying it looks like a bear did this, and trying to say we were drunk and must have been mistaken about what we saw. I know what I saw, and whatever that was, it wasn't even close to looking like a bear. It's over 10 years later, and Brian and Kat's bodies have never been found. It was written up as a black bear attack. I never talked about it to anyone. Jesse and Sam got married, moved to Florida. Lindsay moved too, but we broke up not long after that happened, so I don't even know where. What still gets me is whatever that was at our tent first, but Lindsay's coughed, and it went to Brian and Kat's tent. I don't know why, but I know a cough saved my life. True, Whitlock Lake's mystery. To understand why my mother and I were out at Whitlock Lake, I have to give you a little background on us. My mother and I run a wreath business in a quiet northern Michigan town. Violent crimes are virtually non-existent. It was fall, around this time of year when the forests in Michigan become rich with color. This day was full of color. Instead of buying pine cones for decorating wreaths, we decided to go foraging for them in our local woods. I knew about Whitlock Lake from my high school days. Some of my friends and I went out there a couple of times to party. It's a small camping area with about 3 sites. This lake is connected to another bigger lake a few miles down the road. It is in a small old logging town called Jennings, Pop 20, maybe a little less or more. The times I went out there as a high school student, it never had a strange feeling in the air. The day my mother and I went to forage, the air was thick with fear and we felt like we were being watched. We thought maybe it was just a small woodland creature hiding and watching, waiting for us to leave, so we continued. About an hour goes by and we decided to move on. We moved to where the forest meets the water. There are cute tiny little baby pine cones that we use for our tabletop wreaths. Shortly after we found ourselves at the edge of the lake, we heard a few gunshots from across the lake. We live in northern Michigan. People are getting ready for hunting season around this time of year, so we shrugged it off. We got into our car and moved down the trail. When we got out of my car, I noticed quite a few shotgun shells on the ground. Again, it's not uncommon to find shells of any sort on the ground this time of year. We continued. We were at the end of the trail with the last 2 campsites on either side of the trail. We continued foraging for about 20 more minutes. As we walked across the trail to the next site, we noticed something very strange. At the opening of the campsite, we noticed a tall 5 feet or 6 foot wooden pole. On top of that pole, we saw 2 leather straps wafting in the wind. To us, that was strange. Why would someone want leather straps on a pole? Of course, we put it out of our minds and continued. A short while later we stumbled upon an old beat-up mattress that looked like it had been there for a while now. As we got closer to the mattress, the ground around it was very mucky. As soon as you stepped somewhere you sunk about a half a foot down. People dump garbage in the woods a lot up here. When we started walking past it to get to the pine cones on the other side, this horrible smell seeped into our nostrils. We both looked at each other at the same time and got the hell out of there. By now we're scared out of our wits. As we were driving out of the trailhead, we were met by a guy in a red Cadillac-type vehicle. The look on his face scared the bejesus out of us. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it was all in our heads. I would like to think that my mother and I have a good sense for that sort of thing, and we got out of there just in the nick of time. Needless to say, my mother and I have never been back to the lake and don't plan on going back. About a week later, I couldn't hold this event inside myself anymore, so I called the cops and recalled the incident as best as I could. They said they would look into it, and I haven't heard anything since. This happening still haunts me to this day. I'm always thinking about what may have actually happened out there. Something in the woods. I guess I'll start with the background. I'm a 33 years old female, but this story takes place when I was a teenager, living in a suburb of Chicago. The village I lived in was quiet and middle class. We lived about a mile from the police station, and the worst crimes we had were a murder or 2 and a robbery once in a blue moon. 99% of the time? Boring and more boring. Unless you had a car, you were stuck just walking around the park at night with your friends, kinda boring. Anyway, one night, my girlfriend and I decided to go hang out at a park with some guys at like 12 a.m. The night was a bit windy and had a full moon. I even got a kiss that night from the boy I liked. But the night wasn't just fun and hanging out late. There's a deep forest in the park with a stream and a playground right next to it. The same playground we went to with swings and jungle gym columns. There are 2 bridges, one of wood, the one everyone uses, and one bridge made of rocks, that's rarely used because it is deeper in the forest, over the stream, connecting the 2 halves of the forest/park area. I'll get to the rock bridge in a minute. We hung around on the swings and chatted and just spent the evening together. I'm sitting and just looking around, talking and enjoying the peace and quiet and the moonlight. I have a full view of the forest, with a dip of earth that I know leads to the stream. I see something moving over that dip of earth. Some dark shape. It looked like it was crawling out of the forest. An arm, then another arm. It pulls itself out of the ditch/stream. A figure darker than the surrounding forest. And I'm sitting there, frozen. I think I'm seeing things. It just kind of lays there, on the ground, but doesn't move. A flash of fear grips me. What if it comes this way? I look to my friends and no one notices anything. I look back and it's gone. Did it go back or go somewhere? I really want to get out of there. Then one friend asks, "Did you guys hear about the urban legend of the rock bridge over the stream? Apparently, some kids or something played on the bridge and fell over and died." What a thing to say after what I saw. But I didn't ask anyone anything and just pretended I didn't see anything. But the experience stuck with me. I never talked about it because it must have been my imagination. Things like that happen only in scary movies, right? But I rarely went to that park after that. And Black Thing, if you are real, I hope we never meet again. Who knows what would have happened if you saw me the same time I saw you. The Cottage in the Woods. Now this isn't a scary story, but more of a creepy one. My friend's dad's family used to live in the woods near Eureka Springs, Arkansas. My friend's uncle was the oldest of the 3 kids and was allowed to explore the woods on his own, even though he was only about 9. One day he came across a little cottage nestled in the woods. He knocked on the door and was greeted by two old ladies. He promptly asked for some water, as he had been exploring for hours. The ladies invited him in and gave him milk and cookies and sat down and talked with him while he pet their white cat. They talked for a while, and they eventually invited him to stay for dinner and spend the night because it was getting dark and he was a ways from home. His parents were pretty used to him being in the woods for nights without coming back, so he accepted without question. He spent the night without incident and returned home the next morning. He visited many more times over the next year, and one day, they told him to bring his parents and brothers the next time he came. So the next week, the whole family embarked on the long trek to the cottage. When they arrived, however, they found the remains of a small cottage that appeared to have been abandoned for years. Everyone was very confused, as they all trusted that my friend's uncle had visited the women many times. They had absolutely no idea what had happened or if my friend's uncle had actually been visiting anybody. To make things even weirder, as they were leaving, an old, skinny, white cat ran past them, darting into the trees, leaving them in utter shock. True creepy woods. Okay, so I don't really know how to start this story off, but it just happened like an hour ago, and I'm still spooked. So, a bit of a preface. My friend and I are home alone right now, and have been for a few hours. Every time he comes over, we go to the woods by my house, and it's normally uneventful, with some throwing rocks and breaking trees and stuff, harmless fun. But this time, something else happened. Like I said, we're home alone, and have been for a while, and while this happened, we were obviously home alone. We went outside to go to the woods, and the trip there was uneventful, but once we got there, something was off. Everything was dark, tons of trees had been knocked down, and the entire place was not like I remembered it being. We kept going in, still having our usual harmless fun, and at one point my friend turned to me and said we should go back. I looked at my phone and decided it had only been 30 minutes, and so we might as well stay longer, cause it'll be a few hours until anyone would want us to be home. We continued on, finding a few strange things, like an old crushed Mountain Dew can, probably 10 to 20 years old, and a toy boat which had been completely destroyed by the wind and water and other things, and was probably even older than the can. Our plan was to go further than I had ever been into the woods, which isn't very hard for us because I've barely been that deep. After walking for a while, we came to a landmark I knew of that marked about the deepest I've ever been. A while ago, when I was going far in, I came upon a bridge built on a log that fell over a river in the middle of the woods. However, one thing was different. There was something sitting on top of it. Whatever was on it was small and resembled the head of an animal. When we got closer and got a good view of it, it was a deer skull, pearly white and clean, sitting on the bridge, with no clue as to who put it there and where the rest of it was. Behind the river there was a huge hill with a creepy small house on it, and while we were looking around, I heard a creak almost noise from up to the top. Freaked out, we began to run, and from behind me I hear my friend scream, and I hear him running behind me. We both keep running, and once we reach the edge of the woods, we step onto the road. I asked him why he screamed, and he said he heard footsteps next to him. We quickly made our way home, and when we got there, the garage door was open. Not knowing if it was left open or not, we ran inside, locking the door, checking the house, and turning around. We're sitting here, and by the time I finish this, it's nearly 2 hours since, and I still can't shake the fear of that eerie woods from me. If you would like more evidence that this happened, ask my friend, at Cringy Minji. The Creepy Man in the Woods. I used to live on a small farm in the US growing up. But as soon as I was 18, I moved out instantly, and I'll tell you why. When I was 12, my best friend Zach, who lived down the road, and I used to go into the woods to play. Since we lived in the country, there was almost nothing to do. We would always explore and pretend to be treasure hunters. I always used to take my dad's old cowboy hat, and Zach would take his small shovel every day. But if it was a bad day, we would just play some games on my Nintendo 64, This happened like 13 years ago, so it was the best you could get. We would always go a bit deeper into the forest every time we went in. We usually managed to find something interesting in the woods, like old coins, water bottles, some nice-looking stones, and some other things. Yeah, I know, really lame stuff, but we were kids at the time and we always thought of it as treasure. I had a small box under my bed to put the things I found in it, and so did Zach. We had an awesome childhood, but some creepy stuff started happening over some time. One day, while we were exploring the forest again, we came across a well. We got really excited, thinking we actually found something good. We checked it out, but there was nothing special and the well was dry. We pretty much got our hopes up for nothing. We headed back home and another day was over. The next day was a Friday, and when we got back home from school, Zach went back to his house and I went back to mine. Not long after having lunch, Zach was at the door. I grabbed my dad's hat and opened the door. When I opened it, Zach was there with 2 other boys. They were much bigger than me and Zach. Zach introduced them as his cousins, saying they were staying with his mom and dad for the weekend. Their names were Danny and Simon, and they were both 15, 3 years older than me and Zach. They wanted to come with Zach and me into the woods. I agreed, so we went there. It was just a normal day for the most part, but Zach's cousins were total assholes, saying it sucked being in the woods and asking us how we never got bored out there. Later that night, around 11 at night, I got knocks at my bedroom window. It was Zach and his cousins. They told me to come down. I managed to get downstairs without awakening my parents. I opened the door and the cousins asked me if I wanted to go to the woods. I had never been out there at night before, and to be honest, I didn't want to go, and I told them that. Then they said, "You're lost?" They went off in the direction of the tree line. I changed my mind, grabbed my dad's hat, and ran after them. I caught up to them, and we started to walk deeper into the woods. I was scared shitless, and by the look on Zach's face, he was scared as well. The cousins stayed in front, shining their flashlights on the spooky trees. I noticed we were going in the direction of the well. I know the place like the back of my hand, so I had a plan in case shit hit the fan. We were coming up on the well. Suddenly the cousins stopped and turned off their flashlights. We asked them what was wrong. They stood still like statues. Then we went around them since we stayed behind them, and I froze as well. There was a person standing in front of the well, not looking in our direction thankfully. I stood there like a statue, not knowing what to do. Then one of the cousins, I think it was Simon, whispered, "Turn around slowly and walk away slowly, don't make any sudden moves." I complied, and we all turned around and started walking back slowly so that the figure wouldn't notice us. Then the terrible happened. I stood on a stick by accident and made it snap. It was loud, and we weren't far away enough from that figure, so we all stopped again. I looked back, and the figure was now looking at us. I almost fainted with fear. Then Danny screamed, "Run!" We all floored it. I dropped my hat while running back, but I didn't stop to pick it up. I had no idea if the figure was following us since all of our footsteps made it hard to make out. I didn't look back either, so I didn't know. We all managed to make it back safely. I ran into my house and slammed the door shut. My parents were awake, and I got shouted at by my parents, and I was grounded for a week, but they also looked really relieved. My mom hugged me and said, "I'm so glad you're safe." I was confused and asked them what they were so worried about. Then they told me something that made me even more scared. They told me that recently, an escaped killer was on the loose, and he was last spotted in our area. When my dad saw that I wasn't in my room since he would usually check up on me and the front door wasn't shut, they thought I had been kidnapped, and they were about to call the police when I came through the door. After hearing that, I started crying. My parents asked me why. I told them what had happened. Their faces were full of horror after telling them that. They called the police immediately. Later on, they arrived. I explained everything to them. They said they would take a look in the woods, so they did. Half an hour later, they came back with nothing, but they said that next day they would bring more cops to search the area some more and warn me not to go into the woods again. I obliged. I could barely sleep that night because I was so afraid that the man would come for me. The next day, more cops came to our farm and started investigating the woods. They also went to Zach's house. My mom came in and said she found my dad's hat on the doorstep. I remembered that last night I had dropped it. How did it get there? I thought about it some more, and the man in the woods came to mind. I started panicking again. My parents calmed me down and asked me what was wrong. I told them about the hat. They had nervous looks on their faces. My dad took the hat to a cop outside. I managed to calm down again, and for the rest of the day, I just played video games since my parents grounded me. Around lunchtime, we got a knock at the door. I answered it. It was Zach and his mom. Zach's mom asked me if she could talk to my parents. I told my parents they were at the door. Then they told Zach and me to go in my room and play something. I put my ear against the door and listened. Zach's mom told my parents that Danny wasn't in the house in the morning, and after hearing the news about that creep in the woods, she began to worry. One thing didn't make sense though. All four of us made it out safely. I was confused. Then Zach told me something that scared the living shit out of me. He said Danny had left the house when they got back. He left while Simon and Zach were sleeping, although Zach wasn't sleeping. Zach said he looked out the window and saw him walk into the woods. He wanted to stop him, but he said he was too scared to go out there again. He never came back. I asked him why he left. Zach didn't know. Then Simon came over to hang out later on. I asked him if he knew why Danny left the house. He said he had an idea. Danny always used to carry around his dead mother's ring with him, since his mom had died a year prior to the events of the story. He always used to keep it in a box, and he would take it wherever he would go. Simon checked the box in the morning, and it was empty. He must have dropped it while we were running from that guy last night, he said. After that day, as weeks went by, the guy in the woods was never caught. The cops started an investigation on Danny's disappearance. He was also never found, and Zach and I never went back into the woods again. Once we reached 18, we bought a house between each other and became roommates. Nothing's better than having a roommate as your best friend. I'm 25 now, I live with my girlfriend, and I still hang out with Zach. But even after all that time, I still think about that night every day, and I probably will for the rest of my life. Creepy Woods Encounter. I live in a boring little town in Florida. It's an uneventful place, so for fun or maybe just out of pure boredom, my friend and I would meet up and take late-night walks around our town. We usually met up across the street from these woods right next to a small abandoned fire station, down the road from a gas station. On this particular night, my friend wanted to go explore this little path that cuts directly through the woods. It was about 1 a.m., and I thought it might make for a cool adventure, so I obliged. We crossed the street and made it to the mouth of the trail. I should mention that there was construction going on at the left-hand side of the woods, so it was fenced off, but the lights from the site slightly illuminated the trail, so we really didn't need flashlights. I had this uneasy feeling right off the bat like we were being watched, but I chalked it up to nerves and an overactive imagination. We continued down the trail, and I started to notice weird sheet-like branches breaking and leaves crunching just out of view. I told my friend that maybe we should leave, and not 10 seconds later, the lights at the construction site shut off. Freaking great. The moon was pretty full, so I wasn't too worried. We didn't walk too terribly far, and I could still make out the mouth of the trail. We decided to walk back, and I felt relieved. That's when I noticed it. Crouched down in a bush not 5 feet away, someone was watching us. I told my friend to run, and we booked it. I could hear the person running after us. We kept running and eventually made it out of the woods and crossed the street. I turned to look back, and I saw him right at the mouth of the trail. This dude was completely naked and looked insane. He had a glass bottle in his hand and he just threw it in our direction. He then grabbed rocks and other things he found on the ground next to him and just started wildly throwing them. We made like trees and got the frick out of there. We didn't stop until we made it to the gas station. I noticed that my friend was bleeding pretty bad from his arm, and he told me that right after I grabbed him to run, something hit his arm. Upon further inspection, I noticed that my friend had a large piece of glass sticking out of his arm. He needed 15 stitches. We called the cops and explained what happened, partly because we didn't want anyone else to get hurt, and partly because I didn't feel safe with that guy running around. When the cops searched the woods that morning, they found signs of someone living in there and, more disturbingly, bloody clothes that looked like they belonged to a little girl. I never heard anything about it since then. The Man in the Woods. Okay, so I just got home like 20 minutes ago, and I quickly made a Reddit account so I could tell you what just happened to me and my friends Lauren and Matthew. So, we were walking in the creek, and we heard footsteps behind us. We looked, and there was a man who looked kinda confused, so we asked him, "Can we help you?" He said no and just walked off. I told Lauren that was kinda weird. We encountered him again about 15 minutes later. He asked us if we had any water. I said yes and handed him a bottle, and he took it, opened it, and splashed it at Matthew. I ran towards him, and he pulled out a knife and brandished it at us. I grabbed my friends and ran. The police never caught him. The Walk Preface. I am a 23-year-old woman, and I am half Cherokee from Georgia, USA. At the time this story took place, my fiancé and I were living on a large farm in Maryland. We didn't use the farm, but we were renting a small house on the property, and were free to come and go around the grounds. I was only 19 when this happened, and the only residents in our home were myself, my fiancé, and our cat and dog. Our cat was a lunatic barn cat that I had rescued because I can't say no to animals that need help, and our dog was my loyal pit bull, who is a sweet, cuddly scaredy cat. She weighed about 75 pounds and was afraid of her own shadow. Our farm was situated on about 20 acres of land, and our driveway was about half a mile long. So usually when I would get home from work, my loyal dog and I would go for a walk usually. I brought my fiancé with me. Not that I was afraid to go out alone, just that he spends too much time playing games and not using his legs. After our driveway was a 12-mile long road through woods and farms until it finally reconnected with civilization, so it was safe to say that we were far, far from other people, except for our landlord, of course. The first mile was through open farmland, followed by a brief patch of forest, and then about a half mile of wheat fields and then solid forest for 2 more miles. Now that you have a bit of the layout, on to the really creepy bit. So, it started off like any other weekday evening. My fiancé and I returned home from work to our happy cottage and happy pets. Harley, our dog, was frantic to go for a walk, so I quieted her and changed into walking clothes and asked if my fiancé would join me. He had gotten home shortly after me and said he had seen one of the coyotes that we have around close to the field by our house. But as you may know, coyotes are mostly scavengers, especially out here on the East Coast, so I wasn't too worried, and I am very capable of defending myself. I called him a puss and then told Harley that we could go and that we would be fine without him. Laughing to myself, we left the cottage and started walking toward the driveway. The sun was going down, and the October air had started to get a chill to it. It rustled through the cornfields next to our long driveway. The corn was about 6 feet tall at this point in the year and impossible to see through, so I assumed that my fiancé was just trying to scare me because there was no way he could have seen a coyote in this field. Harley was enjoying her time in the field, tearing in and out of the corn stalks on our walk up the driveway, and I knew that with as big of a coward as she was, she would alert me to any danger very quickly, and by running away. By the time I reached the end of the driveway, the sun had set, and the moon, which had already come out, was shining high above the fields. It wasn't quite full, but it provided enough light that I didn't need to use my flashlight or Harley's collar light. We turned left down the road and proceeded across the first section of the field. The first field was soybeans, and if you don't know, they are relatively short plants that nothing but a rabbit could hide in. In the distance, I spotted a few deer, but nothing alarming, so we relaxed and enjoyed our walk through the night air. I threw a stick, and Harley brought it back over and over again. Typical dog and owner stuff. We reached the first small section of trees, and Harley stopped and bumped into my leg, letting me know there was something ahead. It wasn't a coyote or a deer, but there was a rabbit that had been hit by a passing car and was still struggling. As much as I hate to say this, there was no way it was going to live, and honestly, it's probably what drew the coyote pack in. I knelt down by it, and using my knife, quickly put it out of its misery, as my family had taught me, and let it pass into the next life. Feeling sad but somewhat relieved that all we had encountered was a handful of deer and that poor rabbit, we continued our walk and passed into the next field. This was a wheat field, and the wheat was about ready for harvest, so it was quite tall and hard to see through. The field was quiet though, and Harley didn't do anything, so I figured that the coyotes had passed on if there had been any at all. Now this is the part you have been waiting for, and I don't know what it was, but here it is. We rounded the corner of the field and into an area with wheat to our left and forest to our right, and the air seemed to go still. Harley got closer to me, and I heard rustling in the wheat field. I saw 3 tails circling back toward the forest, coyotes. The eastern coyotes are small, but in a pack, they get pretty ballsy. Harley raised her hackles, and I yelled, "Get out of here! Go on! Fuck off!" As loud as I could, and the coyotes, startled, scattered off into the trees. I decided to turn around and get out of there before they decided to regroup because I am brave. But I'm not going to walk into a darkened forest with a coyote pack and a cowardly pit bull. We turned to head back, and again, I heard rustling in the wheat. A confused I thought it must be, but no, Harley was standing stock still staring at the wheat, and I whistled for her to come with me, that high-pitched, ear-piercing 2-fingered whistle. That snapped her out of it for a second when my whistle was returned from inside the wheat. All of a sudden, all of the family legends I had heard came flooding back to me, and I expected to see a tall, thin creature emerge, but nothing did. I didn't smell rotting meat or feel a sense of dread. Instead, I was transfixed with fear. I whistled again. The whistle was returned again, very human sounding but at the same time not. Against my better judgment I said, "Hello?" My own voice replied, "Hello?" My hand on my knife, I said, "Show yourself." Silence. No bugs, no coyotes, no Harley noises, just my own breath. Slowly, the rustling started again, and I turned on my flashlight. I shined it on the wheat field, and what I saw confuses me to this day. Animal eyes, that green-yellow reflection of light, was cast back at me, but what it was connected to didn't make sense. There was a girl, no more than 14 or 16, crouched in the wheat. She wore what I think must have been some kind of deer skin or fur, and she was naked otherwise. She was very thin and looked as though her skin had never seen sunlight. Her hair was long and tangled with wheat and leaves. Under any other circumstances, I would have said she was beautiful, but at that moment, she was terrifying. We stared at each other for what must have been a solid minute or so, but felt much longer until I heard the unmistakable coyote howl from the forest. Both of our heads snapped toward the noise, and immediately I heard her take off through the wheat toward the sound. At that same moment, Harley took off toward our house, and I went after her. We didn't stop running until we got to the driveway, and I stopped, not wanting my fiancée to know I was running away from something. I could still hear the howling in the distance, and we started walking at a brisk pace. We made it back to the cottage with no further problems, and I didn't tell my fiancé about it, not wanting him to go out with the gun. She hadn't hurt me, so I didn't think it right to hunt her. I was awoken in the middle of the night that night by the sound of the coyotes outside our cottage. This wasn't usual, but now I wondered if she was with them. When I was coming home from work about a month later, I had stopped obsessing about that night, and I almost thought I had imagined it when I had to slam on my brakes for something in the road. It was dark, and when my headlights hit it, its eyes reflected green and yellow. It was a large coyote. It just stared at my car for a moment, and ran off into the woods. I know this sounds crazy, but I still wonder if that was her. True monster or imagination. My name is Brandon, and I live in Alabama. I'm about 14, and this story takes place in the year 2008 or 2009. Not really sure, I was young. So at the time, I lived with my grandma and grandpa, which I'm not going to say why. We were not beginning to move in. We were doing things around the yard, putting grass around the house. We had a few people helping my grandpa and grandma, while my brother and I played around in the street and around the house. It was not a very big house, but big enough for us, and it had a deck on the back of it. There is a small patch of woods behind it. While my brother and I were playing, I just felt something off about the woods, like something was in there watching. I would hear sounds of leaves and branches moving. Maybe it was the wind or not. Maybe 40 or 50 minutes later, we were hungry and thirsty, so we ate and later went back to play. When we got back, we went to play. About 10 minutes passed, and I forgot about the woods and the sounds I heard. I stopped and just looked to see if I saw something. I walked over, not really close, but close enough, and still nothing. It's like whatever was in there just stopped. So I didn't want to think about it even more because I get paranoid easily and left, not going back over behind the house. The next day, there was only a little grass left to cover the house, and the sun was setting. I didn't remember to avoid the back of the house unless necessary. I was playing and walked behind and stood there. I had a feeling that something else was here. I turned to my right and saw this big animal or something like a werewolf with yellow eyes, looking, laying on the ground. I stood there for seconds, then ran to the front of the house, telling my grandpa. Well, he didn't believe me and told me to keep playing. So for the rest of the time, I just sat at the front of the house, thinking about what that was. I still don't know what it was or if it was there at all. Before I moved from there, I swear I hear things outside in the woods and sometimes see things. I hope this story gets on the channel. Kill me if you can. Hunting. It's an avid hobby of mine, and runs in the family. My favorite animals to catch are deer and boars, as they are quite a challenge to catch, and I love a challenge. As well as general hunting, camping in the woods is therapeutic for me, as you're in nature's natural habitat, which can be greatly enjoyed when by yourself. Accompanying this is the type of people you meet while hiking. I've met people who shared their food and campfire with me, and some even hiked with me in the gorgeous wilderness we call the woods. But most of the time it's your animal friends who accompany you while walking and camping. I wish this story was about all of the above, but things took a plummet for the worse. And this is my story. I had recently completed an assignment which I would like to describe as long-winded and quite boring, even though it was my favorite topic, human biology. Due to this, I decided to take a 5-day hike across a vast stretch of woods, brilliant for hunting apparently. As a hunting enthusiast, I decided to hunt for some deer and possibly some boars if I came across any. So I prepped up my water filter, packed my tranquilizer and hunting equipment as well as my pop-up tent and some snacks high in energy, and took the 3.5-hour drive to my destination. I was stoked and excited, as I loved camping and hunting, as I could unwind around nature and overall enjoy the set atmosphere the woods provided. After what seemed like days behind the wheel, I arrived at what looked like an abandoned parking lot at 3:30 p.m., as all the bays were empty, and the ranger's office looked as if it hadn't been occupied for years. But I brushed it off, parked up, and began my hike. The place gave me a very uneasy vibe, as if the woods beyond the ranger's office were sinister, in a way. I can't really describe what gave me this uneasiness, but I honestly chalked it up to the place looking abandoned and creepy. Either way, I headed out onto the path and began scouting the area for animals. I've got to be honest, this set of woods was exquisite. The sun was shining through the trees, and the animals were up and active, and I came across a few deer, but no boars unfortunately. Fast forward to 8:30 p.m., it was uneventful, to be honest, and it was getting pretty dark and gloomy now as it's mid-November. Now, I need to add that I'm quite a paranoid guy, as I was burgled at the age of 15, and all was okay in the end, but that paranoia of something or someone lurking in the shadows stays with me in the back of my mind when I'm out alone at night. Anyway, excuse the babbling. I then whipped up a fire, cooked up some marshmallows, and warmed up some beans, and ate away, minding my own business. After this, I decided to go for a late-night hunt, as I did a 2-week course on how to hunt prey in the woods when it's dark, and I think it really paid off. 15 minutes later I put the fire out as I was prepared to go on a late-night hunt, but then my blood ran as cold as ice and my hands started to shake when I saw a silhouette of a person about 100 m away from me. It was unexpected, so I internally freaked the frick out. As well as this, I noticed a small pocket knife in their left hand, and it looked like they were crouching and stalking something, as they had their knife at the ready. I believe it was a man, about 6 foot tall, and his back was facing me, so I believe that he didn't notice I was there, which I took as a godsend. However, it could just be another hunter, like myself. After shooting bricks while watching this man for 5 minutes, he disappeared into the inky night, and I got over it pretty quickly as I thought he was a fellow hunter like myself. I honestly wish that that was the case. Fast forward 1 hour, and it's around 9:45 p.m. and I'm feeling confident enough to go back out into the black wilderness and catch a deer or two, or maybe even a boar. I pinpointed where my tent was with a map and went on my way with my hunting equipment. 10 minutes later, I'm practically in no man's land, as everywhere around me was pitch black, but I knew what I was doing. I was stalking a deer, which hadn't noticed me, and was about 50 meters in front of me, plodding around the eerie woods. I grabbed my tranquilizer and placed the deer in my sights. That was when I heard twigs snap. My eyes darted, my legs went into jelly mode, and I jerked my neck to the source of the noise. What the frick? A freaking silhouette appeared out of the tree to the left of me, about 50 yards away, and just watched me, not the deer, but me. The deer was long gone now, so it was just me and an unwanted guest. His size concluded to me that he was the same guy as before, 6 feet, roughly 200 pounds. He stared at me, and I stared back, my body still as stone, but my sudden outburst of adrenaline was making me shake. I couldn't see his face, as it was too dark. Frick, was he a late-night human butcher? Am I not going to see daylight again? I just about choked out. Who's there? I tried to say in the calmest voice I could do, but fear was evident when I asked the question. The man raised the hand with his pocket knife and pointed his index finger towards me. That was it, I freaking bolted it north, while mildly tripping up and hitting my head off tree branches. Twigs snapped rapidly behind me as this son of a bee was chasing me. I looked back once and saw his vacant right hand brushing tree branches to the side of him. His knife gripped tightly in his left hand. I then realized that during it all, I dropped my tranquilizer. Frick that sheet, I can buy another one. I know, I should have shot the guy, but it's amazing what one can forget when in a horrific situation, even if it's a gun. I wasn't going back for it. A ton of thoughts were going through my mind while I was fleeing. Why me? What does he want? Money? My food? What could it freaking be? That was when I honestly thought I pissed myself, as he then said in a rapid tone, "Isn't this fun?" He then had the goddamn audacity to start laughing in a patronizing way, and I couldn't take it anymore. I sped up, and I'll tell you now, it's amazing what the human body can do when adrenaline and natural instinct takes over. I never ran so fast in my life. I made a hard right, dived into some bushes nearby quietly, and eventually lost the guy. I heard his footsteps go the opposite way, and it turns out that I went in a huge circle, as I could see my tent, only 50 meters from me now. I was freaking shaking, and tears were starting to form, but I had to stay strong, I just had to. What would my father do in this situation? I tuned my ears into the inky darkness, and heard nothing, and I saw nothing. I was not going to turn on my phone torch, as I'd be an open target. I checked my watch, and it was now 10:30 p.m. I've been in the tent for 10 minutes now. I sat still in my tent, listening to every small noise I could hear in the woods. Snap! I held in my gasp, as I heard a twig snap behind the tent. And with that accompanied a low and sinister voice. "You think you could run?" I win. With that, my tent was being sliced open and the fricker popped head in. He was freaking licking his lips and his wide eyes locked with my eyes. "You lose!" he screams as he pulls the knife out. Fighting. Not my strong point, but the gym made me a pretty strong guy. So as he tried to stab me, I grabbed both his arms and fended him off from plunging a blade into my torso. I tried to disarm the fricker, and he laughed during the process. I thought he was trying to intimidate me, however I was ready to kill. Not a deer, not a boar, but a human. I restrained his left wrist, but his knife was inches away from going into my foot, so I stepped onto his right hand, pulled back on his left wrist. Then snap! His left wrist snapped, and he let out a blood-curdling scream. I had the upper hand and freaking took advantage of this. I got the knife from his distorted, shattered hand and gave him a taste of his own freaking medicine. I sunk the knife into his right hand, and he screamed. I lay a few punches and I think I popped his nose, but I had no regrets. I grabbed my arm in pain, as he made me bend it in an awkward position when he was on top of me when he first ripped the tent open. But I honestly couldn't care about my injuries. He tried to kick me, but I punched him in the face until he was unconscious. I checked my phone, and I had no phone service. "Frick," I panted. I picked up this fricker into a fireman's lift, and I remembered my way to the ranger's office as it was exactly west from my tent. After an hour of struggling with a killer on my shoulders out cold, I found the ranger's station, and to my surprise, a young man, around 20, was there. I collapsed to my knees as I explained the situation. As it turns out, the guy slashed my left bicep, but the adrenaline numbed out the pain. So when it wore off, I suddenly was in pain and noticed the laceration. The ranger called for backup, and they eventually arrived. I don't know how long it took. Frick my belongings, I was not going to go back out there to retrieve them. The ranger offered to drive me to the nearest hospital in my car, and I did. The night stalker was taken away but was semi-conscious. The next day, I woke up in a hospital bed to an officer. And what he said next was burned into my memory, never to be erased. When I first saw the killer, his back was towards me, knife in his left hand, and he was crouching as I mentioned earlier. It turns out that he was stalking another hiker, who he brutally murdered and mutilated at the scene. They found chloroform at the scene, hence me not hearing any screams or cries for help. I vowed from there onwards to never go hunting again by myself. The next time I went hunting was half a year after this incident, with 4 other mates. And although the woods have a beautiful atmosphere and vibe, never judge a book by its cover, as the tables can turn within the blink of an eye. For all of you going camping and hunting, stay safe. And remember, don't think that these things can happen to you. True skinwalker sighting. To start this story off and to give a little insight about me, I am an 18-year-old female who grew up in Michigan and have lived in the country for as long as I can remember. And for a heads up, this is a long story, so bear with me. Now back to the story. On one particular hot summer weekend, my friends and I, including my boyfriend, let's call him Tony, and my older brother, let's call him Brad, decided we were going to go camping for the weekend since it was such a nice warm week. Tony's parents owned a cabin way out in Ludington, surrounded by a huge, wooded area with a personal lake and no neighbors for at least 4 miles. But being stupid teenagers, we didn't really think about that. All we were ready for was to party like any normal teens would. Well, after being there for 2 hours, our fun had started. Tony's friends had brought tons of alcohol and weed to last us for the weekend, so we wouldn't be bored since we had no service and only movies to watch. After it got around 12 a.m. and was pitch black, we had a huge bonfire going. It was a total of 6 people, including me and Tony. As we talked and laughed about upcoming events in our lives, we were so distracted that we didn't notice that my brother had literally frozen his eyes onto one section of the woods. Mind you, we were all intoxicated and high at that time. Eventually, our talking ceased when Tony realized his friend and my brother had an emotionless expression. "Hey dude, are you alright?" he asked Brad. Silence. Brad didn't reply or even make any movements that would indicate he heard me. After that, I started to get scared, as well as the other two girls there. It took a lot for my brother to act that way. Eventually, I was the first to catch on that he was excessively staring into a certain spot in the woods. I turned my head and followed his gaze the best I could. And when I finally caught on to what he was staring at, my heart dropped. There, right there, was, at first look, the dog. At least that's what I thought. It was someone's dog that had wandered off. But then my brain kicked in, and I realized there weren't neighbors for miles. So how could there be a dog? My mind started to race while Tony still tried to get Brad to speak, or even move. In one motion, this thing stood up tall. And when I say tall, I mean gigantic. It had to be at least 6 foot tall. Everyone saw it then. How could you not? The other two girls and the other boy with us gasped as they finally grasped why my brother was as still as a stick. No one moved for what seemed like hours. Tony was the first to talk. No tail, he mumbled. No one heard what he said but Brad. And I swear to you when I say his eyes widened as big as pen saucers, that freaked me out immediately. What did you say? One of the girls asked. It has no freaking tail, he hissed at her. My heart stopped. He was right. There was no tail on this thing. Suddenly, my clouded alcohol mind cleared up in a fraction of a second when I finally realized what this thing was. Now I understood why my brother was basically pooped his pants. This thing was a skinwalker. My instincts kicked in right then and there. But before I could knock the fudge out of there, the thing let off a terrible stench like rotting meat before screaming inhumanly. The sound was enough to scare the fudge out of everyone. My brother was the first up out of his chair and started shouting native words to the creature while I told everyone to get the fudge inside. No one questioned me when they saw just how dead serious I was, especially Tony. He had never seen me so scared, so he knew it was a bad situation. We all hightailed it into the cabin with my brother in tow, still shouting native words at the creature, which seemed to keep it at bay while giving us enough time to get inside. He slammed and locked the door before turning all the lights off and grabbing a special ash from the kitchen counters and started throwing it at every window and door while chanting. Of course, he had everyone freaked out and basically in tears at that moment. After he was done, no one said a word for a long time. All of us still in shock. He grabbed our dad's pistol and had it posted by him for hours. Everyone was entirely too shaken up to even question what happened. We must have fallen asleep eventually because I woke up to my brother packing all our stuff into the 2 cars early in the morning. I understood why. We had native family. We knew what we were dealing with, and we knew it would come back and maybe not alone. Before we left, I did a blessing on the cabin and spoke a few calming words to the still very freaked out girls. We left as soon as everything was packed up. To this day, we still haven't explained exactly to our friends what happened that night. And they never bothered to ask us either. Train abductor / possible pedophile. So, this happened last summer when I was 14. I am in Boy Scouts, and we were taking a train ride to Oregon where I was going to Camp Makola. I was with my friend Ethan, who was 12 but looked around 8. We went to the lounge car where there were more of my troop. We sat down and ordered some pizza. We were chilling and started playing poker when this man wearing a hoodie came over and sat down next to us. I couldn't quite see his face until he looked up. He looked like he was in his late 20s and was carrying a box with beer and some pizza. He was nearly bald and looked like he hadn't had a shower in weeks, and his eyes were wild and blue, like White Walker blue. He started mumbling to himself something when my friend Cameron tried to move away and he yelled, "Don't touch my beers." Cameron moved away and apologized, saying he didn't try to touch it. Then he started mumbling to himself again and asked, "Do you have a BTC radio?" One of our patrol leaders said no. The man said, "It's a damn good radio, incredibly powerful thing." He started mumbling again. Then he asked if any of us brought our knives. I felt my knife in my pocket and began to bring it out to hand it to him when my patrol leader nudged me and told me not to. We all said we left it in luggage. The man went quiet and occasionally mumbled something to himself. I got my pizza and continued playing poker when Ethan, who was distributing cards, was walking around and went by me. My eyes wandered onto the man who was staring intently with an insane look at Ethan, like an "I'm going to skin you alive" look. I was amused but a bit creeped out by this. I'm really good at making insane looks as I am an actor, so I gave him my "I'm going to skin you alive" but jokingly look. When he turned and gave the same look he was giving Ethan, but to me, it was worse, and at this point, I was creeped the fuck out. I told my patrol leader, and he said, "I know." All the patrol leaders told their scouts to leave slowly, one by one. I was about to tell your patrol as well. We left one by one, and when we got to our seats, we started talking about how creepy it was. Speak of the devil, the man starts walking down our aisle. Now, Ethan and I sit next to each other, and the man stopped by our seats and wrote down our seat number on a notepad or something. Now Ethan and I were creeped the fuck out, especially Ethan. I wanted to protect Ethan. I am big and muscular, but an unarmed 14-year-old and like 5 feet 8 inches. And this dude was like 6 feet 2 inches, and far more muscular, and possibly armed. It was about midnight, and I was going to sleep. The lights were off, and everyone else was asleep, but I stayed up because Ethan wanted me to, in case he comes by. When I was literally 2 blinks away from going to sleep, I saw the man's reflection on my window, like 2 fucking feet from me. I thought it was a hallucination, but when I turned around, it was still dark, but I could see the fucker. He walked in front of me and was about to start picking up Ethan when I realized what was about to happen. I hit the recliner button on my seat, and that shit closed fast and hard, and crushed his feet. I heard a crack. He made a noise in pain, and I pushed him down. He fell in the aisle and made a grunt of pain, then ran down the aisle to another cart. Now, if I was smart, I would have screamed or told someone, but I was too tired. I went back to sleep. An hour later or so, I wake up. The man was again in front of me, but this time, he was already lifting up Ethan. When I realized what was happening again, I flipped and started yelling, "You asshole, get out of here, you creep." He dropped Ethan back in his chair. I hit the recliner button again, and he was already on his way back to the aisle when the recliner caught the back of his shoe. He ate shit then ran? My patrol leader heard me yelling and asked what happened. I explained, and he told me to go back to sleep. I did. I woke up about 2 hours later. I woke up to hear my patrol leader telling the dude to basically fuck off. I went back to sleep. I woke up around 7. We just got into Oregon, and were like 3 hours away from the camp. The man was gone, and I asked my patrol leader what happened. This is what he said. The dude went back to the lounge and chilled there for a bit. A Cub Scout, who was 9, walked down to get a late-night snack. The man saw the Cub Scout and followed him. The Cub Scout went to the bathroom, and the man followed him in and started banging on his stall, saying, "Let me in." The Cub Scout, who just got a phone, called his dad and told him what was going on. The dad rushed in, and the man ran off back into the train. The cops were called, and at the next stop, the cops of the town boarded, and my patrol leader gave a statement about what happened. The police found the man hiding in the luggage cart. He snuck onto the train and had 3 knives on him. I don't know what happened next with the man. We went to the camp, and I had fun, but I had some anxiety attacks after this. Months later, I visited a therapist, was diagnosed with PTSD and anxiety. I'm still in Boy Scouts and have tried to work through it, which I think I almost have. I rarely get triggered, but it happens.